The City Council Committee on Ordinances License. The City Council Committee on Ordinances, Licenses, and Legal Affairs, co-posted with the Committee of the Whole, will meet in person on August 24th, 2023 at 6:30 p.m. or thereabouts for the purpose of discussing and reviewing the ordinance relative to Chapter 2, Article 4, Division 14, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board of Trustees, Section 2-1001, Composition, and Section 2-1002, Appointments of Trustees, Term, and Vacancies. This meeting will be held in the City Council Chambers, 93 Washington Street, Salem, Mass., second floor. In person shall be the primary method of public access to such meeting. A secondary method of public access may be provided if technologically feasible through Salem Access Television and or remotely through Zoom. See the agenda for information on remote access. Let's see. Please click on the link found in the agenda, password 704801, or telephone 888-475-4499 or 877-853-5257. The webinar ID is 819-0550-3633. The City Council Committee on Ordinances, Licenses, and Legal Affairs, co-posted with the Committee of the Whole, met in the City Council Chambers on August 24th, 2023 at 6:43 p.m. for the purpose of discussing the matter listed below. Notice of this meeting was posted on August 18th, 2023 at 11:55 a.m. With us tonight are the OLA Committee. All members are present. And also joining us from the Committee of the Whole, we have Councilor Watson-Felt, Councilor Merkel, Councilor Hapworth, and Councilor McLean. We also have Amanda Ciancola from the Planning Department. So tonight, as stated earlier, we are discussing and reviewing the ordinance relative to Chapter 2, Article 4, Division 14, the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board of Trustees. And we're going to limit discussion to the composition of the board, the number of people on the board and the composition. Okay. So to start this off, the current ordinance for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board includes the mayor, 2 city councilors, the city council president, to what? Just go to video set. No, this one. Oh, this one. So you can integrate it, but okay. I think. Try that. Okay. Try talking. So the current ordinance. Is there another option? I know. That's okay. I'm trying to figure out an issue here. The USB video, yeah. That's all. Is there an audio issue? Please hold. So the ordinance includes the mayor, the city council president, 2 members of the city council, 4 members of the public for a 1-year term, and 4 members of the public for a 2-year term. I'm just going to keep going here. So what's been happening over the past year or two is difficulties in reaching a quorum. It's a large group. 12 members is a large group. I did have a conversation with Shelley Gehring from MHP, thank you, who said that it's more common to have a board of about 8 members, between 7 and 9 members. And the board needs to include the mayor, and then the makeup of the rest varies depending on the city and how they decide to set up their Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board. So that's why the issue is in front of us to discuss and possibly make changes to the makeup of the board in order to make the board, make it easier to meet a quorum. And just, there's a lot of work now. I think we're at a pivot point. We've had many years where the board has been discussing policy and discussing changes to ordinances or creating new ordinances. now we're at a point where the board actually has money. And so taking votes and discussing the application process for that money and how it's going to be decided, and then voting on distribution of the money. So it's a kind of a pivot point for the rest of the board. And so it's a good time to talk about the makeup, I think. So with that, Councilor Cohen.
Thank you, Chair Marcillo. A little context: prior to being a councilor, I served 9 years as chair or co-chair of the now Human Rights Coalition, and 7 years of the Sustainability, Energy, and Resiliency Committee, which was the Renewable Energy Task Force. When the task force was created, it was through an enabling act by the legislature, and it limited and still limits that board in Salem or anywhere else in Massachusetts to 7 members. So my experience is that they had a much easier time making a quorum, which I think is valuable. But I also want to add that most of the boards in Salem do not have any representation as official members of elected officials. There's a couple like the Port Authority and this one that may have the mayor, but I'm actually of the belief, and having served, this is my second year on as one of the designated counselors on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund board, I think it's really not in the interest of a board like this to have any city councilors serving on the board. They could be liaisons. They can obviously attend meetings and contribute. They can be in working groups. We just had a bunch of work done on the money that you mentioned, how to allocate that, how to come up with certain criteria for the money, the application, and I think it's in the best interest for Salem and our residents going forward not to have any counselors represented on the board. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else have any comments? So, from my point of view, I agree that boards don't usually have city councilors on them. There is kind of another point of view that since the mayor is on the board, that it would make sense as a balance to have a city councilor, whether it's the city council president or not. So I'm just throwing that out there for discussion purposes. But I agree with you that having 3 counselors on it especially adds to the issues of creating a quorum for meetings. We're all in the same meetings at the same time, and so it eliminates a lot of dates that could work for others. So, I do agree that it's unusual to have 3 city councilors on any board or commission, and so yeah. Councilor Dominguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair Marcillo. I will recognize Councilor Mador, who actually was the president during previous year, in where she and many members of the committees on the city council actually appoint members to be in the commission, which I think I tend to agree with your comments on a way that we need to maintain the balance. Maybe not to have 3, that's a lot. I think that's part of the discussion that we need to have, but I think limited to 1 or 2, at least, we make the balance. I would like, if you don't mind, to allow Councilor Mador to give her opinion if she might want to, because I know she was serving in the board, but also she was the president during a very congested discussion that we have about the trust. If you don't mind.
I don't mind. I don't mind, and I don't mind if Amanda wants to also approach and give her opinion on the makeup of the board.
And Felipe is the current chair of the board, and he's here in the audience as well.
Councilor McLean.
Thank you, Chair. I tend to agree that having 3 members of the council is fairly heavy-handed. I think, in general, having a board whose composition is 1/3 either the mayor or city council is out of whack. I think that's pretty clear. I think it should, the appointee should have an opportunity to do their work and not have it be sort of such a heavy thumbprint from the established municipal government. But I don't think that removing councilors from the board entirely is the correct move. I tend to agree with the point that was raised that it makes sense to have some amount of balance between the mayor sitting on the board and some council representation. I think one is a perfectly reasonable number, 1 and 1 each of them. And I do think that as proposed here, moving from 4 to 3 trustees on the 1-year term so that you end up with an actual odd number, which is sort of just a general better composition for the board, makes sense. And then I think you end up with 7 appointees, the mayor, 1 council representative. You get to a nice smaller number at 9. I think you maintain some presence and some balance, and you still give the board an opportunity to do its work. So that would sort of be the ideal in my mind for seeing this going forward. But I think it's a bit much to remove the council entirely and have a board of appointees that are then sitting in front of the mayor. There is some gravitas that sits with that office. There is some influence that gets exerted just by dint of it. And frankly, I think it's an odd time to make that choice. I mean, we are at sort of a critical moment for housing in our city and our region, as people know, and it seems odd to me that would be a moment that the council would choose to step back from an opportunity to influence the conversation entirely. So those are my thoughts.
Okay. Anyone else? Councilor Riccardi. Councilor
Thank you. I know it's been I apologize for missing the first half of the meeting, but I thank you for taking this up this evening. As this is my first year that I've been having the pleasure of serving on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board, and the board wants to do good work, and the board works very hard and has a lot of important discussions, but the membership size is just very hard to continue to have a quorum. So I appreciate this conversation this evening. My first swath was I did not feel that the elected officials needed to be on the board, primarily because we have our fingers in the budget, our fingers in the ordinance. Most of the items that come out of there, if they're ordinance or order related, do need to go in front of council anyway, so we already get our vote there. They do have their own trust fund, so money-wise, and that would be their own vote there. But again, as councilors and as a mayor, there's influence there whether or not you are on the trust fund board. As many of us know, we're not on like the other boards and commissions, but we can go and make our comments and points known, as many of us do during those meetings. If anything, I would be okay with 1 or less. I just definitely appreciate having this conversation, and I do think that 3 councilors plus the mayor is very heavy for elected officials to be on the board, and I'm definitely interested to hear what others have to say, continuing the discussion of adjustments. So thank you for taking this up this evening.
Councilor Watson-Felt.
Thank you, Chair Marcillo. I am in full agreement with the format outlined by Councilor McLean. I think if you have the mayor appoint all of the positions and the mayor sit on the board, and historically has acted as chair, I do think that a certain kind of balance is appropriate. Moreover, I have received an email from at least one of my residents who in Ward 2 who had questions about that as well. That if the council were to leave, it is such an important issue. We are so involved in all of the conversations. Why would we remove ourselves from that conversation when there's such an opportunity to really continue that engagement through that channel, as well as here in the chamber. I do understand Councillor Stott's position that everything does come in front of us, and because of that, I'm comfortable with lowering the number to 1, but I am personally not comfortable with lowering the number to 0. And I think that there is an aesthetic aspect to our engagement in that board as well that is really important to the residents, or at least that's sort of how I'm hearing it. That's how it's sort of landing on me from what's coming from constituents. So it's an incredibly imperative conversation, and we know that, and we're all so engaged. And I understand Councillor Cohen's position where we can call in and we can, make our statements known. There's the ability to have conversations outside of these meetings, but I think it's important to be present in them as well, especially when there is a power dynamic present. I feel it's helpful to help to balance that. But I am also, let me say again, I am in agreement that 3 is too many. I wouldn't want to see us disappear entirely. Thanks.
Councilor Merkel.
Thank you, Chair Masillo, not being a member of the committee. Yes, I'll weigh in that I agree with all the points made here, and I am very glad to see this in front of the council. I know there has been issues trying to make a quorum, and I would be comfortable with. I do agree that one councilor at least being some sort of a presence would be a benefit because of the points made. I'd be comfortable whether it's a liaison or an actual member of the board, depending on how the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board feels is more beneficial to the board as far as making quorums, and because I know those are some of the concerns. So I'd be interested to hear their opinions on what they feel is best, if that counselor's role is a liaison or if they should be an actual member of the board. But yes, definitely reducing the number I support. Thank you.
Councilor Hepworth.
Thank you, Chair Marcel, not being a member of the committee. I've also served on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and loved my time on it. I appreciate it. I would have served longer than 2 years if I could have. I think that from what I've seen, even before coming on the council and then since, is that the council has played not the most vital role, but has played a role on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board, from the ADU ordinance, which certain councilors who are here tonight, who are former councilors, played a big role on getting that written into the council. So the condo conversion ordinance today, I think councilors have played a big role on getting those through. And I think having a mixture of people who have expertise around housing, which is generally members of the public that are appointed by the mayor, and then councilors who understand what can get passed and how to get it passed and what the process is going to look like. I think those two things marry up nicely. The 12 people is far too many people to have on a board, so I'm in favor of reducing that number, but I would not be in favor of removing councilors from that conversation, because I think that's the one place where I feel like there's a valuable role to be played by the council.
Okay, anyone else? Oh, Councilor Cohen.
Thank you, Chair Marcillo. So I want to be clear. I mean, we're all of us as councilors are liaisons to other boards that we generally asked to be the liaison to. And I think in most cases, the president that year has tried to accommodate people and put them where they want to be. And the boards that I've been a chair of, we've had a liaison. Liaisons can be present, they can represent things, they understand things, but they're not voting members. And I think there's a big difference between a volunteer resident who is put a lot of effort in, and we're not looking at the way where, this idea that things come back in front of the council. So many of the boards, whether they give us a recommendation or write an ordinance or anything in between, it comes in front of the council. So we can still be present if we're liaisons. We can still offer our opinion. The public is welcome. This year, there's been really robust, public participation, and it's been very disappointing because we've had meetings where we've had people who are really dedicated to whatever issues are before us, and yet we can't have an official meeting because we don't have enough people to make that meeting. So I understand that a lot of people in the council believe that there's some kind of balance between the council and the mayor, but I look at more that we represent our constituents, and we can do the same thing if we're a liaison to a commission or a board. Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Councilor Stott.
I'll follow this. Thank you, Madam Chair, for not being a member of the committee. Just to kind of add on to that, my thoughts that were going on during that, I feel like members of the council on a board as a voting member of the board, especially in the sense if we're talking about more than one, it's almost intimidating. Like, we want to have the public and those that are knowledgeable, which is why they're on this board in the first place, to be comfortable with the matters that they're discussing and using their expertise. If 50% of those voting members in the meeting that night are members of the council and are sitting there saying, well, we couldn't get it passed, or we can't do this because of that, or I don't think we'd get the support, I feel like that might stymie some creative thinking that will go on during that board, which is something that we really want to utilize. So that just kind of popped in my head, and I wanted to make that comment that council presidents could also have a negative effect here. And I think the methodology that we use with our council presidents in the regards to liaisons currently works well. I'm also not sold on having the mayor stay on this, but it's another topic. Thank you.
Ms. Giancola, can you come up? I think that the mayor has to be on it, right? Either the mayor or the town manager. So, yeah.
Hi, thank you. Yes, the mayor is required to be on the board per state statute.
Okay. Don't go anywhere. Do you have any input on size, on makeup, any suggestions?
I appreciate all of this conversation. I think it's been a great conversation. I, again, appreciate the limiting the number. Lower than 12 would be great because it has been very challenging to get a quorum. I would recommend an odd number just to make it easier for voting purposes, so you never end up with a split vote. And in terms of whether a counselor is a liaison or on the board, I'm indifferent to that. I defer to the city council for that discussion. I do appreciate at least having a liaison as present, because we do work on a lot of policy, and having that counselor participate in the process and be able to help move things forward with city council is very helpful. As mentioned, we've worked on accessory dwelling unit, inclusionary housing, the disposition of public land, condo conversion. There's just a lot of heavy policy that comes through that will be in front of the city council.
Yeah, and to that point, these are just a few comments off the top of my head. Even with 3 counselors on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund board, helping with inclusionary zoning and the ADUs, it still failed in the city council. So to Councilor Hapworth's point about, helping to figure out what will pass, you just don't know. That's my opinion. So eventually, not the first version that came out from there, though. I'm sorry? Okay, we could have this conversation offline. The first version came out of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund board also, so with 3 counselors. That's all my point is. And my hesitancy with a liaison position is that there is no power in a liaison. The board can choose to include the liaison or not. We have boards that have liaisons and never involve them in conversations or meetings, and it's just my opinion that if you're going to have the mayor as a voting member, you probably should have, if the counselor is going to be there, they should be a voting member, especially when it comes to allocating money. I just think that it's a better balance as far as that goes, but that's just my opinion right now. My other question is the term and the length of the term, and this wording always bothers me because I don't think we follow it. Because the way I'm reading it says, no trustee, excluding the mayor, shall serve for a term exceeding 2 years. I don't know what that means. The term that they're appointed to is either 1 year or 2 years, but we have had people on there that have been there for more than a term, like more than 2 years. What is that supposed to mean? Do you know?
I'll get back to you on that question. My understanding is their term has been extended, but I'll get back to you.
Okay. Is there a desire? Do you think that it makes sense to limit a board member to just serve 2 years and then move on?
Well, I have to look at state statute again to determine, if there's a requirement there. It depends on the type of government. Some do require a term limit. So again, I'll get back to you.
Okay, thanks. All right. Councillor Watson-Felt.
Thank you, Chair Marcello. I do not have anything for Amanda, so do we want her standing here still?
No,
or?
sure.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure you weren't stuck there. I wanted to make a second comment coming off of some of the things that President Stott commented on, which is just about sort of this concept of influence and stymieing creativity. And I referred in my comment before to a power dynamic. And I do think, to your point, Madam Chair, the liaison has no power, right? And the liaison can choose, the chair can choose not to acknowledge or allow them to engage in ongoing conversation. And I do, having also served on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund board now since, I don't know, Christine, 2021, I think, something like that. Maybe before that. There is debate, there is deliberation, there are robust conversations that take place in that room. And I 100% agree with President Stott that a large quantity of elected officials can stymie conversation. I have the exact same concern about our primary elected administrative leader being both, the only elected official on the board, appointing all of those people, those subject matter experts, those volunteers who are their voters, whoever's voters. I think that the power dynamic can be really intimidating there too. I think especially if you have a mayor who's got a very strong, very bold agenda, it can be very difficult to engage in conversation. And I've seen it. I think, that we're not sure who gets appointed feels bold and strong enough to engage in really open, comfortable, hard dialogue around some of these really important issues. And not to say that every counselor would be good at it, but I think just the presence of that balance is really important to enabling a sort of sense of that comfort as well. So as much as I agree that too many of us causes the same problem, I think the full absence of us also causes could cause that same problem. I just wanted to, since we were dialoguing about it. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Varela.
Thank you, Chair Marcello. Just want to thank you, echo Councillor Watson-Felt's sentiment on that. I do believe that having one member, the president or their designee, would be appropriate, only because of what we've talked about. And that would get us to our odd number of 9 if we did eliminate those councillors. And I think, if come back to this a couple of years, and if it doesn't work to have one, we'll remove that other councillor. So with that, when you're ready, I do have a motion to be made after you do your thing.
Okay, thank you. Any other comment from the... Wait, well, I'm going to, hold on. 9, right? But can I ask for public comment first?
Can I just comment on the math?
Yeah, Councilor Stott.
It's a 12-member committee. If we remove 2 counselors.
Plus 1, yeah. Well, we didn't get to amendments yet.
Plus the mayor, plus the...
Is there any comment from the public? You can come up and...
Good afternoon, good evening, I guess, at this point, councilors. Felipe
Can you
Zamberlini.
move the...
Move it a little bit.
Go.
Is that better? Felipe Zamberlini, 19 Linden Street. I'm also the current chair of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board. Just a few items I want to bring up to all your attention. I'm siding more on Councilor Stott's position on the makeup of this board for a few reasons. Makeup of a board is imperative to make sure that we can do the work. And yes, councilor presence for several councilors that have been in this board have been really amazing and useful to be able to create ordinances. But 12 members have been a significant challenge, so start there. It's an even number. We are a very amicable board, but there are topics that are spicier than others. It is housing after all. And we do run a risk of having a problem of a stalemate at all times with an even number. So I think it is extremely important to make sure that whether the makeup of the board includes one or no councilors, whether it's a liaison that has a presence but not a vote, or a member that is actually a present and voting, it needs to be odd. that should really not be an even number to really prevent that. We have vacancies on the board right now. I have personally been doing a lot of outreach to housing advocates in the city, and there is a lack of desire from housing advocates to be on this board, for the perception that there is a lot of politics behind it rather than policy. So I would highly recommend leaning more towards an active liaison. I would encourage you all to consult with MHP on how to write this perhaps, but I would encourage having a language here that states that this liaison shall be part. So therefore it is not up to whether it's me as the chair, totally welcome to engage that member of the council as an active liaison, or a future chair who's not willing to do that. So I would encourage you all to have that conversation and figure out how to write that in to make sure that that active member doesn't vote but has active participation at all points. And particularly the reason I'm saying not voting is a combination of quorum problems and a combination of just the makeup of the board itself. When we're looking at this board as active members of the community who are active policy professionals or active housing professionals or folks that have experienced homelessness or housing insecurity and are bringing in their voices, I'd like to make sure that we're enabling that voice to really be present right there rather than a voice of politics. And I think that's really important for us to bear in mind, that these boards are there to do policy work. They're there to designate items and to listen to the feedback of both the mayor that is required by statute and the member of the council that is going to be a liaison to also be there and be heard and bring the voice of the council to this board as well. And vice versa, bring the information that has been created, whether it's a policy that we've developed or just the debate that has been had on the board back to this board as well. So I would encourage that you all consider a number of 7, primarily because we have had significant challenges recruiting people who are interested in participating in the board that feels more political than policy. I would also recommend that you do look at that makeup of that number. It is confusing. I agree with you, Councilor Marcelo. It is very confusing that it says 1 that will be elected biannually, and then or 3 rather that would be elected biannually under the current amendment proposed, and then 4 that would be elected every 2 years. I myself have been in the council since 2018, and on the council in the board since 2018. I have been reappointed consistently. So I think I would consider that as well for folks. And I do think that there is extremely importance in making sure that this board continues to be effective, and a larger number, as we've experienced, has proven ineffective. We can't meet often. There are consistent conflicts to get a quorum because members of the council can't be there. And then we have inactive members in the board, which is a whole different discussion that the board itself needs to have. So I would highly encourage you all to consider those points. Make sure that a number of 7 is a reasonable number. It is within the parameters of similar sized municipalities, oftentimes smaller than the city of Salem even, and making sure that we try to do our best to make sure that this is a board where voices of people who are professionals in the field of housing can feel comfortable and willing to be engaged in that body without the politics being a significant part of it, while the policy being the priority. As I said, I am the chair, so I am more than glad to take questions, but I'm also just glad to take a seat back and let that be that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Good evening, councilors. Christine Madore, 20 Federal Street, Unit 8. Here to speak in support of removing all council seats and extending term limits. Well, no, extending term length on board membership on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board. So a quick recap. The Affordable Housing Trust Fund was declared in 2006. And as a result, the board was created as well. The purpose of the trust fund and its board is to preserve and create affordable housing. You could argue, as Councilor Hapworth had already touched on, that some of the policies that were vetted through the trust fund board and then eventually adopted by the city council will both preserve and create affordable housing in the long run. But there has been 0 tangible results by way of the number of affordable housing units preserved or created, despite the powers and the duties that are empowered by our local and state laws. pursuant to the trust fund and its board. So given the urgent need of more affordable homes and more homes in general in Salem, it's been 17 years since the trust fund and its board has been created. I'm hoping that you don't take another 17 years to take another look at this board and its composition. In regards to the composition of the board, it is currently bigger than the city council. Salem has one of the biggest trust fund boards in 141 cities and towns that have affordable housing trust funds and trustees or boards. That means to reach a quorum, you need 7 members of the trust fund board to hold a meeting. It's the only board in the city, in Salem, that has counselors, sitting counselors, as members of the board, as you already heard. But unlike other cities and unlike other boards and commissions in the city, the trust has the power to accept, sell, acquire, convey property and funds, mostly public land. But the SRA, the Salem Redevelopment Authority, the Salem Housing Authority has the same powers. They don't have sitting counselors on them, and they're doing just fine. In fact, those two boards combined have created and preserved more affordable housing than the trust has in the last 17 years. And because there's sitting counselors on this board, currently it is subject to political cycles and interests. I've heard the counselors consider, why not leave one council seat on this board to balance political interests, especially when the mayor is required to be on this board. But I ask you, how are you going to appoint this member of the council? Why that person is appointed, and why this one counselor can exert more influence than the other 10 sitting counselors? Is this counselor representing the entire body, or are they there purely for their own interests? I would suggest that you don't appoint a liaison to this board if you insist on keeping one city councilor on the board. I suggest that you appoint an ex officio, non-voting member to maintain that influence on the board, to advise on city council policy-making processes. And just going back to the powers of the board and the powers of the city council, there are redundancies that cannot be ignored. The city council can also acquire, convey, accept public land and funds, just as the members of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board. Why is there redundancy that is being created right now with city council members sitting on this board and members of the trust fund board? What is the value in that redundancy? Is it possible that a city council member sitting on the trust fund board can vote to accept or sell property while sitting in a trust fund board meeting, but vote the other way when sitting in a council meeting, deliberating on the same matter? Because as you know, to accept, sell, acquire, convey public property and funds, it ultimately has to go through the city council. I would also suggest that you add city staff, someone like Amanda, to be a voting member of the board. In the case of Brookline, they have actually an even number of board members. They do have one select board member. They have that is a voting member. They have a staff member that is also a voting member. But the difference is that I said the city of Brookline because they are actually the size of the city, but technically they are a town. So in Brookline, all decisions are made through town meeting, not the select board. So let's see. So the need for affordable housing outlives political cycles and terms. It should not revolve around political discussions within board meetings, as Felipe had mentioned, and I completely agree with that. And moreover, in Salem, the city council term is 2 years. we all know too well that development takes more than 2 years. To have terms of the board members extended beyond 2 years would be great for continuity and institutional knowledge, especially when you have members that have technical expertise or the lived experience of facing housing challenges. So I think that's all I had wanted to mention. I think an appropriate number of years for a term would be between 3 to 5, staggered, so you won't have a fully vacant board. So yeah, those are my comments, and I really appreciate that the City Council is taking this up. It is well overdue, and I hope the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board will eventually start to take some real steps in preserving and creating affordable housing in Salem. Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. I have to ask you some questions as an expert.
Sure.
You brought up the SRA and the SHA as not having sitting counselors on their boards. They also don't have the mayor.
They do not have a mayor.
Right.
Required. They're not required to have a mayor.
Correct. And then you talked about distribution of funds and property, but I was under the understanding that the Affordable Housing Trust Fund can allocate money, and it doesn't come through the City Council. They make the decision. It doesn't come back to the City Council for approval.
No. So in the terms of Affordable Housing Trust Fund, there are ways that you can generate to replenish funds in the trust fund itself. And one way is through ARPA that was allocated through the council. That's one way. Another way is through impact fees that could come from inclusionary zoning. So for example, you're requiring 10% affordable, but if you allow the developer to not build the units, but pay a certain rate for the units, that funding usually could go to Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and the trust fund board could make decisions on how to use those funds. Their donations.
No, I understand that. I'm talking about the actual allocation of the funds, distribution of the funds. You sort of made it sound like if there was a counselor on the Affordable Housing Trust Fund board, they would vote there, and then they'd get a second vote in the City Council. But that decision does not come back to the council, correct?
Not always. So in the case of the trust fund itself, the trust fund ordinance does allow the trust fund to make allocation decisions. So in the case of, there's one example that I wanted to bring up. So in the city of Lynn, our neighbor in Lynn, they established their inclusionary zoning. Well, they adopted it this year. And along with the inclusionary zoning, they created a trust fund and a board. And by April, they have already received a $3 million allocation from the city council. And by July, they were already awarding those funds. So it depends on the source of the funds, whether the city council has to adopt it, have to make a second vote, but the trust fund board itself is empowered to make those decisions, whether through real property or funding. And another way for the board to receive funding escape my mind, but I will try and remember it later.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes. And then my other question was the length of the term. You don't think that a 5-year term is unwieldy? Like, who would sign up for a 5-year term? Like,
yeah,
that's a long time.
I think the SRA is 5-year terms currently, but I think 2 years is simply too short. It should be longer than 2, whether it's 3 or 5. Okay. But 2 is just, a city council cycle is 2 years. Mm-hmm. It takes more than a year typically to adopt any housing policy. So when you have this churn of members, then you have to try and recap for the new members. And then by the time they're up to speed, they're moving on. So I think the short term is really an issue for continuity.
Okay. Do you have an ideal number in mind for the composition? How many are on the SRA? 5. There's 5 members of the SRA. Okay. Do you have anything?
I think 7 is good. 7 is good. like my colleague Shelley told you, it's usually between 7 and 9. But I think 7 is perfectly adequate. And I can't remember what the planning board has. Is it 9? Is it 9? Yeah, I mean, 9 could be good too. An odd number is always convenient. But
Also, Disabilities Commission and CERC.
I'm sorry. Hold on.
I just remember what I was going to say. I'm sorry, Counselor. I will switch over to you. Oh, crap. Now, oh, yes. I think one incredibly missed opportunity for this trust fund board is the fact that we have CPA, Community Preservation Act, that has earmarked housing as a funding objective. And there's about nearly 100 communities that have trusts and CPA adopted that they are able to, every year, the council or the select board can vote to allocate that earmark funding automatically to the trust fund. So the trust fund will have a sustained funding source. And because the membership of our trust fund board is so big, I think some of those discussions get just put on the back burner. But that's a huge opportunity, especially in years when the CPA does not get a housing application for funding, and that's a perfect opportunity to say, well, the trust fund is looking at something, let's just allocate that to the trust fund.
There's some trust funds, also trust fund boards that include a member of the CPC.
Yes, absolutely. I think we had that. I think we had that 1 year.
Oh, you had 1 year, but not. It wasn't a set aside role for a CPC member. Do you see a benefit in that?
Well, yes, I see a benefit, just as I see a benefit for a counselor to be on the board. But then again, CPC members are not subject to political cycles or changing political interests.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Counselor
Cohen?
I'm sorry. Chair Marcelo, I did want to mention we have other boards that don't have counselors on them that can allocate money, such as CERC, through the Enabling Act for Renewable Energy Trust Funds, and the Commission on Disabilities also collects and allocates money and has allocated a lot of money this year.
Okay, thank you.
All set?
Anyone else? Councilor Dominguez.
Thank you, Councilor.
For me, or can I go? Or for?
Yeah.
Oh, it's for me?
Yeah, it's a general question. I don't know if you had the answer or anybody else can answer. And I know I heard the comments on political, maybe political issue other than policy issue that Felipe made, which I tend to agree that I hear that so many times. But that can be solved by maybe the city council appoint part of the members, not necessarily one member of the city council or members of the city council, but in general, maybe appoint 2 members of the public coming directly from the city council instead of the mayor. That way, the perception that there is a political only one side can be avoided, and the balance is created there. We don't need to have, I tend to agree, we don't need to have maybe president of the city council on that body, but maybe a appointee by the city council coming directly from the city council and some appointee coming directly from the mayor can make the balance. It's a question that I asked. I mean, if you have the answer, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I think that also creates a redundancy because all members of the board currently has to be appointed and then confirmed by the city council. So if you're suggesting that a member of the public be directly appointed without further confirmation, I think that could happen as well, but you could always not confirm the mayor's appointment. So I would kind of ask you, what is the benefit of directly appointing a member? So that's just a question that's maybe rhetorical at this point, but just wanted to point that out.
If I may, is to avoid the perception that there is a one side only, coming all and everyone appointed by the mayor create only one side, depending who's the mayor, and that's created perception in the public, and that's why we hear a lot of comments saying this is a political machine that is working towards some agenda. But if you pick one side and the other one pick another one, there's nothing there. You equally represent both of the body in terms of who you appoint. And that's the logic that I bring in.
So speaking both as a former member of the council and who has served on the trust fund board, I would admit that I actively recruit members to the trust fund board as a counselor, that maybe I don't directly do the appointing myself technically, but I look for smart, willing, reasonable citizens of Salem who have an interest in creating and preserving more affordable housing, and ask them if you want to serve on the trust fund board. And so I may not be appointing this person, but I do forward the names and encourage them to put in their application. And if they do get appointed, I very gladly confirm them if I was a counselor. So I think that the fact that the council does not directly appoint a member of the public does not take away the fact that you can still advocate and encourage someone to apply. And again, to reiterate, the council can always deny an appointment if you don't think the mayor's appointment is good enough.
That's created political revenge that happened. And that's basically one of the points that is being brought out. Political paint the situation as a political opposition if we as a body say no to an appointee by the mayor by any case, and that's what we try to avoid. And I think this is a matter of perception more than anything else. We know for a fact that it's not really a competition between in many cases between the mayor and the city council, but in the eyes of the public which elect us, who actually are very clear that we was elected for check and balance, when that is not created in the perception of the public, is give them some ammunition to continue to say that there's a political agenda involved, that is not really what they really want to see. So we need, if we wanted to make that balance, maybe create some type of system that we show the public that we have selection from one side and selection from the other side, and combine, and they're going to do the work.
So I'm not sitting in that seat. You are. You don't have to convince me.
No,
I'm just here to provide my opinion and my experience. So I understand what political dynamics could happen between the mayor and the city council. And if any city councilor can stand up and vote against an appointment.
Agreed.
You don't have to be a yes woman or a yes man, and that might create some political tension, but that takes political courage, and I think that's why being city councilors is so difficult. And I'm not sitting in one of these chairs today. I'm just here to unload my thoughts, which is so much easier.
Councilor Merkel.
Thank you, Chair Marcillo, not being a member of the committee. And thank you both for the comments. That gives me a lot more clarity on how the actual board feels about the makeup of the board. I think you're scratching the surface of what would be a larger conversations, because if we considered appointing to this board, why wouldn't we be appointing to other boards? I think that would be proposing a whole change of process, because why would we start appointing to this board and then why wouldn't we appoint to all of them? And there is a process, like Christy Madore had said, that I've recommended people to apply for our boards and committees, and we can express our opinions on that, and then it does come through the council. I think that delves into a larger conversation if we wanted to have it about appointments in general. I was wondering how many vacancies there currently are, and what it would look like to make those changes, that we would just not fill the vacancies and then take out the council seats, and how would we get to that number 7? Just curious.
I think we'll figure that out when we get to the makeup. Whatever we decide on, we'll figure that out. We'll have a plan for getting to the number. Council McLean.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Just to sort of reground this in the arithmetic of what we're talking about, the red line version of the documentation that we have in front of us doesn't get us to 7, it gets us to 8. And so with respect to the comments that we heard from the current chair of the board, removing all council representation as well as reducing the number of one-year appointees from 4 to 3, but retaining the mayor keeps us at an even number. And so I definitely heard the current chair say that is like a priority. Let's get this to an odd number so that we don't end up with stalemates. And so just putting out there that wherever this conversation goes, what is presented in front of us doesn't get us there. Like some change has to be made to get there, whether that's further reducing the number of appointed trustees or what happens. So I think we are just arithmetic wise in search of a solution still that's not in front of us.
Yep.
I appreciate some of the creative ideas I've heard about, exploring who could be a non-voting member and participate and help to influence the conversation, but maybe not finish it. I have to say, I tend to agree with the at-large counselor that what we're really debating is about the political optics. I mean, these are never going to be politically agnostic situations, right? The mayor is appointing people, the council is approving people. We heard directly from the former chair that there's an opportunity to recruit and recommend. Like, this is all always going to be politically engaged, right? The mayor is not going to seek somebody to appoint to the board who is in conflict with their goals, right? And we as a council are not going to seek to approve such people, right? And if we extend the term of folks who are appointed such that it's longer than our term, we may appoint somebody and then a new council may come in and they may not have the same ideas on what's appropriate as the people who were appointed, and then maybe it doesn't pass. So like, politics is part of it, right? And so trying to argue as if we're going to arrive at a place where politics is not going to be part of it is not going to happen. So we are really talking about the optics of it. We are really talking, I think, about the power of public perception when you see a board that is stacked with municipal representatives versus a board that has 1 or 2 and they each kind of come from different branches. I think that's powerful. I do think that matters. And so I understand what the at-large counselor is saying about the idea of maybe we make selections and the mayor makes selections, because that really is about the optics of it. It's not about the underlying power. The underlying power of it, we all have power, right? The mayor will have power and we will have power. And so I just want to put that out there and say, let's understand there's some limits to what we can do in terms of trying to make it more fair and balanced, but we're scratching the surface because it's kind of a surface level argument, right? Like the political argument in terms of taking the politics out of it is kind of a MacGuffin. Like,
Councilor Varela.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'd like to recognize Ms. Giancola.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come back. I just wanted to follow up. I did pull up the state legislation on this, and it just want to read this part so we're clear. The trustees shall be appointed in a city by the mayor and confirmed by city council. And so having it go another way is not allowed. You have to have them appointed by the mayor. And they shall serve on a term for not to exceed 2 years. So the 2-year term and the appointment method is in state legislation. And I did want to note, currently we have, and I don't want to be short-sighted in thinking about what we currently have for members, but just so you're aware of the membership, we have 5 members on the board who are not elected officials currently. In October, one of the members is not seeking an appointment, so we have 4 members. So we want to make sure not to remove any counselors now, because we would not be able to have meetings. So just to keep that in mind. And as others have mentioned, staff also recruits folks for this board. If I hear someone have any passion or, have a spark about them when they talk about affordable housing, the first thing I say is, hey, are you interested in volunteering on this board? And I would encourage the city councilors to do that, and members of the public, if you're listening, if you're interested in this board, call me, talk to me about it. I'd be happy to let you know more information, but we do need more people to participate on the board, regardless of it's 7, 9, or 12. So thank you.
Okay. Counselor Stott.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Not being a member of the committee, I had a quick question based off of what Amanda just said. So that's interesting. So state statute, we can't make the terms longer than 2 years, but we can increase the 1-year term to every 1 2-year, maybe stagger or something. A question though about how you said the state statute law, that all members of the trustee are appointed by the mayor. So we have 3 members of council that are not appointed by the mayor on there. That's in our statute. So can we add to it? Is that like the minimum requirements, or are we against the state statute by having any councilors on there? Because the mayor's not appointing the councilors onto there.
That's a question I'll need to ask the city solicitor about.
Okay. Thanks.
Counselor Watson-Felt.
Thanks, Chair. I guess I'm looking for some clarification, or I just want to sort of review what I think I've heard. So the Affordable Housing Trust Fund Board can distribute funds, right? And it can acquire land. And it can do so based on the vote of the board. And the mayor is on that board. So the mayor has a vote about distribution of funds and acquiring of land that if we removed the council from, we would potentially not ever see come before us in chamber. So that's important to note from a power dynamic perspective, okay? So this is not about politicizing, this is not about politicking. And oh, by the way, I would say that the member of the board who is an elected official that has the most political personal interest in their long-term political career is probably the mayor, right? I'm not going to speak for other city councilors, but I'm guessing like if you want to be a mayor, you might want to be other things. If you want to be a councilor, you might want to be other things as well, but I think that there's a little bit of a different track record there than the elected official who's sitting at the head voting and appointing. So that's just my last statement on the power dynamic of that. I think a single counselor that is participating. Now, I think that Councilor Medor's questions around how does that person get appointed? Who do we, right now it sits with the president like any other appointment or liaison position. We can have that conversation, but I think that no council presence as a voting member on a board that distributes funds and acquires land when the mayor does, I am not comfortable with. That's it. Thanks.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone else have any? Councilor Merkel.
Thank you, Chairman Castillo, not being a member of the committee. So, yeah, just one last thought to consider. Then we should probably, if it is just going to go down to one council member, maybe it not automatically be the president, and also run it by the city solicitor, and just kind of think about that process for that one appointment out of the council.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You want to make a motion, right? Okay.
Go ahead.
I need to figure out where we stand right now. We have some open questions that we need answers on before we pass anything along for a vote. Councilor Varela.
Thank you, Chair Marcelo. And that's my question. What's the will of the body tonight?
Right.
What are we looking to do? Is there a time crunch on this, or is this something we can
Sounds like
continue to have
there's
conversations?
not necessarily a time crunch because we need to balance, but I just want to review with Amanda. So we need to know whether a city councilor is even really legal on it because of the state statute wording. So that's the first question. The second question is was there any language about okay. Was there any language about how long a person can stay on the board? I know that there's a 2-year term, and all those terms can just be renewed, I guess. And so I just want to make sure that there's nothing there that limits the number of terms. There is not. Okay. Was there anything else in the wording that we have in our ordinance that you found was against the statute besides the counselor thing, possibly? No, okay. All right. Councilor Varela.
Thank you, Chair Marcelo. I'd like to make a motion that
Yes.
this remain in committee.
Okay. Councilor Varela moves that this remain in committee. I will say, I don't want this to be extended very long. I think we can get a few answers and get this buttoned up, but we also need a plan for how to get to that number. And that is as important. So we'll need some help on that. Councilor Paznowski.
Thank you, Chair Marcelo. My question, I think we're pretty close on a consensus. I agree totally with Councilor Watson Felt about having a balance of representation. If a mayor is going to be on a board, then a councilor should be on a board, just to keep things equal. But the question I have, and I think is I'm looking over here at the original wording, and it said that the city council shall annually elect 2 members, which is something that's probably going to change. Is that going to change? Is that going to stay as an election? Or is that going to stay as an appointment? Is the city council president going to appoint somebody from the city council to be a member of the board? Is it going to be the round peg in the round hole, or is it going to be automatically the council president?
Well, that's actually interesting, because what I remember was that the city council president would make the appointment, but it would still go to the city council for a vote. So the city council does vote on the member.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councilor Cohen seconds that it remain in committee. All those in favor? You can't vote. All those opposed, the matter carries. Councilor Varela.
Thank you, Chair Marcelo. I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Councilor Varela moves to adjourn. All those in favor? All those opposed? The matter carries. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Amanda, for your help, and former Councilor Madore and Mr. Zamberlini.